you are here tonight to hear The View from Split Rock, A Lighthouse Keeper's Life. We have with us Lee Radzak, who was the historic site manager at Split Rock Lighthouse and lived in one of the keeper's homes with his family for 36 years. He started doing that when he was newly married, raised his kids there, and spent many years on Lake Superior. In addition, he's also been active in the North Shore community and been as board member and president of the Gitchi-Gami Trail Association and the Lake County Historical Society, and was involved in early stuff with the Superior Hiking Trail and on the North Shore Scenic Drive and Superior National Forest Scenic Byway Councils. When I first contacted him about doing a presentation for the Rovers, he knew about us because of trail building efforts. And so he was already familiar with the Rovers. He started out with the Historical Society as an archaeologist, working through the state on the statewide archaeological survey, and then got placed at Split Rock. He's written a book by the same title as this presentation, and now we're going to hear all about some of Lee's stories about being a lighthouse keeper at Split Rock. Take it away, Lee.
Okay, thank you, Fran. Glad to be here. Happy to be here. Good time of year to do something like this. I'm retired, so it works pretty well for me to stay home and talk about what I did for the last 36 and a half years. What I did was I put together a PowerPoint presentation and probably the best way well, you can't talk about a lighthouse without pictures. So I'll just go into that. I've got quite a few slides to run through, and if there's questions, either hold them for the end, or if you want to break in, I don't know how we want to do that, but I'll be happy to hang around for any questions you have. So let me see if I can pull up the PowerPoint. Oops. Let's go this way. There. Can you see that?
Yes.
Okay, good. And everybody can hear me all right, I'm assuming. So I will just start in. And as Fran mentioned, I worked for 43 years for the Historical Society, but 36 and a half of them were as the historic site manager at Split Rock Lighthouse. And as part of the job, we were asked, the requirement was to live at the lighthouse, live in one of the old keepers' houses. And my wife Jane and I were newly married. I was 30 years old when we moved up there, and I retired that was 1982, and I retired in 2019. And I was asked by the Minnesota Historical Society Press if I'd be interested in writing a book about living at the lighthouse and working at the lighthouse. And I thought, I've stored up so much information in my head on lighthouses in general and how they work and interpretation and preservation. And I thought, I'd love to share that. And they said, well, yeah, but we want to hear about what it's like to live at a lighthouse and to raise a family at a lighthouse. So I see, I can probably do both. And so it was a good timing, because I retired right before the pandemic hit and was able to sit and write during most of it. And then the book was released last May. So good timing. What I did was put this slideshow together, kind of the way the book is put together, going through the seasons and what it's like to live right on the top of that cliff above Lake Superior year round, and just go through the seasons and then talk a little bit more about some of the other aspects of the job. And I also did include a couple of slides and talk a little bit about some of the other things that it was fun to be a part of up in the area up there, some of the things that Fran mentioned. So I'll just kick right into this and see if we can make this work. Let's see if we can. There we go. All right, so For those of you that have been to Split Rock Lighthouse, you're pretty familiar with the setup there. It's a complete light station built in 1910. And there's 3 keepers' dwellings right adjacent to the lighthouse. And the one closest to the lighthouse that you can see in the picture is now restored and open to the public. We live in the house next to that, the one in the picture with the porch on the left side. And this is a view from our front yard looking at the lighthouse. So that's kind of what I woke up and went to bed to every night and every morning. Pretty interesting. As I said, we were pretty young when we started. Actually, we'd been at the lighthouse for a few years, and our kids came along after we'd been up there a couple of years. And then by the end of it, they grew up and we grew old, and things changed. But the lighthouse and the grounds, and my job was to keep it as much as it historically was originally, and that's part of what I did. When we first moved up there, it was November 1st of 1982, and you all know what November is like on the North Shore. And the first thing I had to do was, the site manager that was there prior to me had moved out a couple months earlier, taken another job, so there was still screens on the windows of our house, and I had to climb up in a snowstorm in November and put them up. Of course, this photograph is not during that snowstorm, but that was a first introduction really to what life was going to be like on the shore. And as fall progressed, of course, November storms are very common on the North Shore. And we were lucky enough that the first year we were there, we didn't get hit with a real hard storm right away. This was a different storm from a few years later, but gives you an idea of what the impact can be. And a good chance to watch the ships go by during the big storms. They'd come in pretty close to go into Silver Bay to pick up taconite, and we'd have a front row seat to watch the ships in these storms. And of course, we were there for the Halloween blizzard of 1991, and it was pretty interesting. We had 36 inches of snow in 2 days, and we were snowed in, and which wasn't bad because we were prepared for it. By then we knew how to live, and that there could be days when we wouldn't be able to get out and go anywhere, and people wouldn't be able to come in, and it was quiet when the weather got like this. As winter progresses, of course, I'm kind of one of these people that thinks that spring starts on the winter solstice, and this picture is taken on December 21st. And to me, when I see that sun start to slowly move further north every morning at sunrise, I know that spring's only 6 months away. So it was fun to watch that, and it was always a great view to see that sunrise. And as winter got a little further into it, by around Christmas time, the water temperature was still warm, but the air temperature would be so cold that the sea smoke, or as the old commercial fishermen call it, frost smoke, would be steaming off the lake. And with the northwest wind off the North Shore, it would blow it over, of course, into Wisconsin and Michigan, and that's where they'd get their heavy lake effect snowstorms. We'd get that on the North Shore, but the heavy snow, but not as often the lake effect, because the winds were generally out of the opposite direction. But this morning it was probably 5 below or so, and so you can see the lake is starting to kind of look a little bit thicker, and slowly it would begin to freeze up. Usually not until end of February before we'd see ice, before the lake cooled down enough. But it would usually come. Most years it came. It doesn't seem to come as often or as hard or as thick these days as it used to. But there was plenty of winters when it does freeze up pretty solid. And you'll notice on the left of this picture, there's a lot of ice flows, and that sheet of ice way to the left out in the distance is out on the big part of the lake, and that keeps moving and breaks away, and that pushes up those ice ridges. And these two photographers in the middle of the picture are down on the ice in the foreground, taking their chances out there. I never like too often to go out on the ice on Lake Superior. You just don't know. But there's a few years, maybe once every 10 years, that the lake would freeze almost completely over. And that's the one time a year that it really started, that it would get quiet. Otherwise, the rest of the year, you're always hearing some wave noise, the shoreline noise. And once that got socked in, then it would get really still, and it was winter was there to stay. And usually that would be March, but by early April, it would start to break up again as the sun got higher. Winter, of course, was a great time for us to get out and enjoy it. My job was a little slower because visitation basically happened back then, especially in the summer. So we'd get out, and for the first 10 years that we were there was really no state park other than a road into the light station itself. None of the campground wasn't there. None of the trails were there. The nature center down, a trail center down by the water was not there, and DNR didn't have a very big presence. So we could go pretty much where we wanted to, either skiing or snowshoeing or just hiking in the woods. So that was kind of fun, something that's changed. Skating on the inland lakes, I always loved to do that. Didn't happen very often that the conditions would be right because the snow usually came so early, but once in a while it did happen. And hiking up the rivers, boy, that was always fun. I loved doing that, putting on some cleats. And this is on the Split Rock River, one of the side tributaries that come in, and these ice flows that freeze and look like somebody poured liquid marshmallow or something down the river, and you could walk right up places that you couldn't get the rest of the year. But eventually spring would come again, and that would be very welcome. And this is a view from our front porch looking down towards Little Two Harbors and Little Two Harbors Island, or Ellingston Island, it's also called. There was a commercial fishing village right down on that beach on the main line there. And another view of the same view, but as the weather warmed up in the spring, the fog would start up, and there'd be lots of days that would be foggy and cloudy, and the start out as a real calm, warm morning, but then the wind would switch and blow in off the lake, and the temperature would drop 20 or 30 degrees in 5 minutes, and you'd live with that until the wind died down again. And some of the rainstorms, of course, brought in a lot of sediment from the streams along the shore. You can see it, the brown in the water in these pictures, and more of that damp fog. I included this picture just to give you an idea of, this was, of course, back in probably around 1990. And if you've been up on the shore and walked any of the trails along the shore, just driven along Highway 61, you notice how the birch have suffered so badly over the last 20 years, 30 years. But this is what the forest looked like right below the lighthouse down in the state park back in 1990, and when those birch were still fairly healthy and looking good. It was a totally different forest. And summer's the time, of course, to pick berries. And once in a great while, we'd see some wildlife, major wildlife come in close by. This happened, this moose straight up by the lighthouse in July of 2011, which was, if you might remember, there was the state of Minnesota legislative government shutdown. And for 21 days in July of 2011, they shut down the state parks. There were no state employees. I was considered an essential employee, so I was kept there. And the Minnesota Historical Society's rules were that all the historic sites were to be closed for the duration of the shutdown to protect the resource. So as the visitors didn't come, the wildlife tended to come back, and it was really an interesting time. It was the 1 year that Jane and I and the kids got a feeling for what it would have been like for the original light keepers when it was so quiet before Highway 61 was built, and they were an isolated lighthouse along the shore when it was just the three families there. And some are doing some of the maintenance. I did, when I started out, I was a one full-time employee. We had 6 part-time people in the summer, interpreters, and 1 part-time maintenance guy. So I did try to do as much maintenance on our house as I could to take some pressure off of him. The visitor center that's there now wasn't built until 1986. So when that was built, things changed quite a bit. Prior to that, my office was over in the third keeper's house, and that was staff space and everything else. The Gitchi-Gami Trail. This came in through the state park in 2003. It was built, and it was fun to be part of that planning before that, and to be involved with the board and plan the trail and the route of the trail, and to see it developed along the shore. And it's still fun to see how it continues to be developed and more miles put down. But it's always fun to see new trail. Yeah, this is right just down the shore, up the shore a little bit from Lighthouse, the bike trail, coming real close to the shoreline. And then hiking inland. I loved, if I got time off, especially in the fall, to take hikes. Superior Hiking Trail was developed in the late 1980s, early 90s around the Lighthouse area. And some of the other Superior National Forest hiking trails. It was always fun to get out and discover new places. This is a shot. This is some of my favorite country up there. It's up Chapin's Creek, which is the next creek up from the lighthouse. It hits the lake. The creek comes into the lake right by Gold Rock Point. And if you hike back up the creek and get behind the state park, this is actually, I'm probably standing on the Superior Hiking Trail here, looking out from Christmas Tree Ridge. And it's very nice country back there. And there's still remnants of the logging that happened. The big white pine were logged off between about 1896 and 1903. And some of the stumps that are back there are charred, and you can see where they burned, a few years after that, when all the slash was left laying around, and some of the fires came down close to the North Shore. But those remnant stumps are still there 100 and some years later. And I'm sure you guys are aware that there's a new mountain biking preserve that's been built right behind the lighthouse, actually between Split Rock Lighthouse State Park and Beaver Bay. It's called Split Rock Wilds. And I walked back there, this was just in October. I took a hike back in there, and just to see what they'd done to some of my old grouse hunting country back there. And this is back county land behind the state park. And it's really some fantastic trails if you like mountain biking. I don't know if I would want to hike these. They say they're still hikeable and open for hunting, but they built the mountain bike trails pretty much for speed with these ramped up corners and everything. So I don't know how safe it'd be with the speed that some of those bicycles are going to have coming through there. But this is a new bridge that goes over Chapin's Creek that they put in just for the mountain bike trail. And used to have to just cross at water level, but now there's a bridge you can take. And as you get into autumn, of course, we there was always fun things to do and clean up and, doing things with the kids and the dogs. And we had, in our time there, we had 3 golden retrievers and a yellow lab and about 3 cats. So there was always a little excitement going on. On our, I put this in, this is our son, John, waiting for the school bus right in front of the visitors center at the lighthouse. And we were pretty fortunate that when the kids were just old enough to go to school, and they went to school in Silver Bay, we were wondering, are we going to have to, take them into town every day or take them down to the highway, which is a half mile away. It turns out it's a county road that comes right in and goes through the loop in the parking lot for the lighthouse. So we were lucky that the bus would come and pick them up right at the curb, and in the cold winter, they could sit inside the front door and wait for the bus. So that was part of life there, and they were part of the Silver Bay community. We all were for all those years. Getting ready for winter again. This is pounding snow stakes in, marking the road. And of course, I had lots of help there. But it's a good thing we did it, because you had to be prepared, because in another couple months it can look like this. And then we're back into winter and looking at ice forming on the lake again. And we'd get wildlife in the winter too, because it was quieter. Here's a bobcat that came after our suet on the bird feeder and hung out. And from what I hear, he's still a occasional visitor to the lighthouse grounds in the winter. I want to talk, of course, about some of the history. I'll go through this pretty quickly, but and also about the front porch. The front porch was probably our favorite place to spend time looking out over the lake. And these are the 3 keepers that were there in 1914, and some of their families. Most of the keepers, there were 35 keepers that were stationed there over the 59 years that the station was active. And most of them did have families. They brought their families up and they stayed with them. In the early years, it was only for the summer, because they were taken off at the end of the shipping season in December and taken back to their permanent homes by the supply boats, because there was no highway until 1924 past the lighthouse. So they were pretty isolated there. This is Keeper Franklin J. Koval and 2 of his daughters and his wife in 1933. They actually lived, this is the middle house, this is our house in 1933, and they lived there. And Beulah and Eilina are the 2 daughters. And I always considered a great part of the job that I got to meet these people that actually lived there when the lighthouse was active and were part of the U.S. Lighthouse Service. This is Beulah Koval again in 1990, coming back to visit us and sitting on the same front porch. And it was a good chance to get information and record the things that she had remembered from living there. This is a picture of Grace Young. She was the daughter of the first head keeper, Pete Young, who lived in the first house. And he came in 1910 and stayed until 1928 when he retired. But in the 19-teens, Grace would come as a young girl and take care of her dad, cook for him, and stay with him. His wife stayed at their home in Two Harbors and didn't like coming up other than for a week or so in the summer. So the daughter came and helped out and really enjoyed staying at the lighthouse. Again, the front porch and the kids when they were pretty young. And that's the view from the front porch. And you can see why we liked it so much. Great place to have a cup of coffee and early in the morning and watch the sunrise, or there's always a difference in the weather and the ships going by. And I do have, the ships usually didn't come in this close, but once in a while they did. This is heading into Silver Bay, 8 miles away into Taconite Port there. I've got a little time-lapse video here if I can get this to work, and it's a summer storm, and I just want to give you an idea of what the view was from there. And when I start up, note the note the visitors on the left that are walking around, and then notice right at the end how the wind shifts and how quickly the weather can change. This is probably a half an hour, 45 minutes that passed by. Now watch how the wind changes and comes up out of the north. Right there. Okay, and another big part of the job was preservation of the historic buildings. There's 11 historic buildings that comprise the light station. And I was fortunate enough to be part of 4 major preservation projects over the years. And I learned a heck of a lot about construction, preservation, architecture. It made the job so interesting that it was worth staying for 36 years. And of course, any kind of buildings close to Lake Superior and in freezing conditions need a lot of attention. And here's some bricks being replaced. And this was 2008, before the centennial of the lighthouse, when we celebrated that in 2010. And at the same time, we also did preservation work on the lighthouse itself and scaffolded in the whole thing and worked on that cast iron lantern, the black part on top, as well as the bricks and the concrete down below. This is one of my favorite photographs. As long as the scaffolding was up, I thought it'd be a great chance to get up. And I'm actually looking down on the ball on the top, the ventilator ball on the top of the lighthouse, and the bird spike. So that's the very top of the lighthouse. I'm looking down on the roof of it. And of course, big part of the job up there and what we did and what the Historical Society does is interpretation of the history of the historic sites around the state. And so that was a fun thing. And over the years, many school groups would come back, and some of the kids that I saw in the early years I was there came back later and introduced themselves as adults with their kids, and were there on family trips or school trips. And to see those different generations come back and really have a connection with it is pretty cool. And we have a staff. There's every day we had about 8 to 14 interpreters on. Some of them were dressed in period costumes, the uniforms of the U.S. Lighthouse Service, as they would have been dressed in from 1910 until 1939, when the U.S. Coast Guard took over the lighthouses around the country. And a busy day would be, we could get 2,000 visitors come through on a day in an 8-hour period. So it's one of the most visited historic sites in the state of Minnesota. I really like this picture. This was 1911, the second year the lighthouse was active. And these are 3 of the kids of the keepers. And it's a great picture because you can see all of the buildings, most of the buildings of the light station, and how it was situated, and what the vegetation, how the vegetation had been cleared off around it and used for firewood and had been logged off prior to that. But the fun thing that I did kind of over the years was go back to the same spot and try and reenact the position of the photograph. So this next one shows Jane and John in the same location. And you can see how it's changed between 1911 and 1985. And really the star of the show at the lighthouse is the 3rd order Fresnel lens that we were very fortunate that when the Coast Guard decommissioned the light station in 1969, they left the lens in place. That's very rare for the Coast Guard to do. Usually they'll pull the lens out and put it in storage and it would remain Coast Guard property, but they deeded it over to the state of Minnesota along with the rest of the light station. So it was our responsibility to make sure we could keep it up and keep it running, and not have it start to disintegrate and degrade. There's actually, it's called litharge or red lead putty that holds those prisms in place. on the bullseye there. And this gentleman in the right of the picture, Jim Woodward, was a lampist with the U.S. Coast Guard when he was active. And in his retirement, he went out and continued to maintain and contract to help people, different museums with their lenses. And there were two of them here. This was another one, and this is looking down from the same viewpoint. The lens is up above. And there's actually, this guy, Kurt, has his hand under, he's lifted up the float. It screws up on some threads, and he lifted the float up, and below his arm is the bowl that the float drops down into. And you can just see there's liquid mercury that sits in that bowl, and that's what the float actually rotates on, so that 1,500 pounds of lens, it works so efficiently that I could turn it with just one finger and push that lens and rotate it. And of course, we've also got the clockwork mechanism and all the original parts that operated the lens in 1910, other than the kerosene lamp. It's been replaced with a 1,000-watt light bulb when the station was electrified in 1940. And one of the neatest parts of my job, I thought was most fulfilling, was nominating and getting a designation of Split Rock Light Station as a National Historic Landmark in 2011. Prior to that, it was on the National Register of Historic Sites, which is more of a state registry, but this gives the National Historic Landmark designation, says it's got national significance. And there's only one other lighthouse on the Great Lakes that's a National Historic Landmark, and I believe there's 11 of them around the country. So it's a pretty good company to be in, and it really means that there's a lot of recognition for the site. And that's about what I've got prepared, but I'm sure happy to answer questions. And yeah, here's the book cover. And if anybody's really interested, this is a shameless promotion. That the Minnesota Historical Society Press is the one that's selling it, mnhs.org or Amazon or Barnes Noble. But it's a fun process to put it together with a lot of photographs, and a lot of them that I didn't use tonight. And so, yeah, if we want to go back to, I'll turn this off. And if there's any questions or discussion, then I'd be happy to stick around and chat for a little bit.
Yeah, hey, thank you, Lee. This is Rob. I was wondering, in that photograph where you were looking down from the scaffolding, you mentioned the bird pole. Can you tell me more about the bird pole or bird knob, whatever that was?
A bird spike.
Bird spike.
Yeah, and if they didn't put those, part of it was it had twofold responsibilities. One was it kept all the seagulls from landing on top of that ball, which they would do if the spike wasn't there. And it also served as the lightning rod tip to distract any lightning from hitting the lighthouse. And in all the years I was there, we never had an incident of any lightning hitting any of the buildings. So that lightning rods seem to help and be effective.
Yep, the lightning rod was my second question, so perfectly answered. Thank you.
There's a strip of copper that goes all the way down along the side of the lighthouse, all the way down the cliff and into the lake, so it would ground out any lightning.
Lee, there was a question in the chat about, could you explain your educational preparation before you took this job?
Sure. Yeah, I went to St. Cloud State. Back then it was college, now it's university. And I majored in anthropology and archaeology, and incidentally had a minor in commercial art, which came in pretty handy, especially when I was doing archaeology. So I really don't have a background in maritime navigation, maritime history. that wouldn't be the case today. If I were to apply for the job today, I'd probably need at least a master's in museum administration or something like that. But I just got by with a BA and then learned everything as I went along, and it was good. I was mainly trained for archaeology, and but it was fun to go from prehistory in Minnesota, and I focused exclusively on Minnesota prehistory, and to go from looking at sites all over the state. And I was really ready to focus on one site and really getting to know the history of one site really well. And of course, it timed out with getting married, so that was pretty handy that it worked out that way.
Another question. Another question. What do your kids now think about growing up in a lighthouse?
That's a question that's a good one for them to answer. I can answer, I think, for them somewhat, in that they, when they were growing up there, they didn't think it was anything unusual. In fact, they wanted to be in town with all their friends. Their friends would come out and visit, and think it was pretty cool. As they got older, and our son worked in the state park for DNR as a worker in high school and a few years in college. And our daughter ended up majoring in environmental studies. And I got to think that growing up in the middle of a state park and being that close to nature, and that tied in with being used to working with public, knowing the public, and seeing what history and nature is all about, and bringing them up with that kind of forefront for them. They look back on it now, of course, fondly, and we're really, I got to give up my son credit. He never in college used that as a pitch for dates or anything, that, hey, I've got a lighthouse I can show you, or anything like that. But they're pretty quiet about it. They're pretty quiet kids, but they really like it, and it's going to impact them for the rest of their lives.
Question about the name Split Rock. From a geological standpoint, is the rock actually split? Is there a huge fissure in it? Is it going to fall into the lake one day, or?
That's a great question, and that's one of the most commonly asked questions. And the truth is that the lighthouse got its name because in 1907, when the Lake Carriers Association approached the U.S. government, they said, we want to put up a lighthouse in the vicinity of Split Rock, Minnesota. So that area of the shoreline had that name long before the lighthouse was there, and the Split Rock River was called the Split Rock River. My feeling is that it's because of the nature of both the shoreline and the rugged nature with the cliffs, and every half mile there's a big prominent point that sticks out, and then in between it's eroded down. Another thought is that before the Highway 61 was built, if you went by on a boat past the Split Rock River and looked up the river, it was open, and you can see that when you drive by, that there's a kind of a wide, quarter-mile wide opening that you can look about a half a mile up the river. So it's kind of like the river that splits the rock. I have a kind of more of a feeling that if you walk up the river and look at the rocks, and all the geology it's this broken up basalt, it's right angle fractures. If you look at the cliffs along the shore, there's big boulders that have broken off. So I think it's a geological name that the early mariners and sailors and people in the area gave it.
Thank you.
There is a formation actually at the river where there's two rocks right next to each other that are like are columns. I thought it was named after that.
And I hear that a lot, and I hiked up and saw those. I'd never heard about them, but I went up there and saw them for myself, probably the first or second year I was up there, before the hiking trail was there. there's a couple of pillars, and they're maybe 20, 25 feet high and about 10 feet apart from each other. But if you walk out into the river right next to those pillars, and look down river, there's an island that it looks like a ship's bow facing upstream, and the river equally splits around that rock on either side. So that's almost like the rock that splits the river more than the pillars to me. But yeah, the pillars are, if you go hike up the trail on the west side of the river, those pillars are about 1.5 miles or so up the river.
They're pretty.
Kinda neat.
They're pretty cool. I like those.
Yeah.
Here's another question from the chat. Can you talk about your role in marking the Edmund Fitzgerald ship sinking?
Yeah, I didn't talk about that. Every year we celebrate, or Split Rock still celebrates. I don't want to say celebrate, commemorates the sinking of the Edmund Fitzgerald on November 10th. And of course, the ship sank on Lake Superior in 1975 with all 29 crew members going down with the ship. And in 1985, on the 10th anniversary, of course, I'd been at the lighthouse for about 3 years then. I heard, of course, Gordon Lightfoot's song on the radio coming back from Silver Bay, and I thought, I've got the keys to the lighthouse. I can turn the beacon on. I think it'd be kind of a nice tribute to turn it on for a couple hours at sunset. And that was the 10th anniversary. So I did that just by myself. And a couple of the neighbors noticed the light was on, asked about it, and said, well, that'd be cool to do again. And so another year went by, and I did it the next year, and a few people showed up. And after about 5 years, people would be coming, 50, 100 people. Still on November 10th, we lit it on the exact date that the ship went down, and started to do an event around it where we did the muster of the last watch with the ship's bell, and rang the ship's bell. And that's continued on every year ever since, and it's become very popular.
Were there any major storms there? I know that there was a one special, was it 1905 or something? And I missed the very beginning of your talk, so forgive me if I missed something here.
Oh, no, I didn't. Yeah, there was a 1905 storm called the Mataafa Blow. Was a nasty storm, sank 29 ships on the western Lake Superior. One of them was the Madeira, just up the next point, Gold Rock Point, up from the lighthouse. And that storm was the reason that the lighthouse was built 5 years later in response to that storm. But yeah, when I was there were not every year you could count on it, but November and April, usually March or April, were the months that if you wanted to see the big waves, that'd be the time to come. And yeah, there were storms. I can remember 1992 was a nasty one in November. When the ship's out on the lake, I had the scanner on, and they were saying the waves were 18 to 24 feet. And they would hate to turn those 1,000-footers around in those waves if they had to head back to shore. And there's, lots of times when the waves would spray up over the top of the lighthouse and ice it up and ice up the parking lot and everything else. Some summer storms could be pretty nasty too. And of course, blizzards in the winter could also be fun, and we'd lose power for a few days and have to make do with that. So yeah, it's a lot of nature.
I heard there's one more reason that the lighthouse is there is because the compasses don't work near there because there's a huge iron deposit in the rocks, right?
Yeah, there's pretty much 3 reasons that they wanted a lighthouse at that point. One of them is the compass readings are deviated anywhere from 8 to 18 degrees. So if the ships are upbound coming from the Sioux Locks and heading towards Duluth or Two Harbors and working in the fog or pitch dark or a snowstorm, they would tend to veer further and further to the right, to the northwest, and come closer and closer to the North Shore. And that's why they wanted a foghorn right at the lighthouse too. So it's got a major light and a foghorn. Another reason is that it's very deep right up to shore. And it's, well, 2 miles out, it's about 900 feet deep. And just off the rocks, just 100 yards, it's probably 200-300 feet deep. So in the early days, the ships they drop lead lines over the side to know when it was getting shallow, and they couldn't do that at that point, until they were right on top of the shore. And so that was pretty important for them to be aware of that and to know. And the other thing was that was a dark passage up the North Shore. There between the Apostle Islands on the South Shore and then two harbors. There was no lighthouses. There was nothing. It was just a black shore. So they needed something to, as they came around from Devil's Island Light and the Apostle Islands, they could see Split Rock 30 miles away and then key in on that and then follow that down the shore. The idea was to have a lighthouse in view anywhere on the Great Lakes at any point. If you could see shore, you'd be able to see a lighthouse. And there were 400 or so active lighthouses on the Great Lakes back in the heyday of the lighthouses back up into the 1940s or 50s.
Are you aware, has anyone attempted to rock climb the bluffs leading, just below the lighthouse, or is it even allowed?
It's not allowed, both by DNR and by the Minnesota Historical Society. And there was one time when it wasn't the cliff right below the lighthouse, which is more of a vertical cliff. But right in front of our house, where the three dwellings are, there was a guy who had his two kids, probably 7 and 9 years old, and they started at the bottom and climbed to the top. No ropes, nothing. And I mean, it's nearly vertical, and it's loose shale and gravel. And we had to help them over the fence at the top. And other than that, there was one time I heard this story. It was a year before I started, that the staff came to work in the morning and they saw an RV parked in the parking lot, and they got up by the lighthouse, and tied to the fence was a sheet, and a couple of guys had taken and tied a couple of sheets together and thrown them over the side, and they were just ready to climb down these sheets, and which is totally crazy. But no, climbing is not allowed. Things have changed a lot with digital photography, and now the drones are, drones are not supposed to be launched or within 500 feet of the lighthouse or the historic site, but it's tough to monitor drones, and everybody's taking digital photography. So that's going on a lot.
Any other questions for Lee?
I was just wondering, I know my family, when I was a kid, we used to stay up near the lighthouse there, and there used to be a lot of commercial fishing. The owner where we used to stay, Castle Haven, was a commercial fisherman, and then he retired. Was there a lot of commercial fishermen on the lake in the past, or?
Absolutely. Castle Haven, that would have been the Linns down.
The Linns,
down
right? Yeah, Linns. Yeah, exactly.
Yep,
Yeah.
Castle Danger, right down about 10 miles away. And it was said that back in the heyday of commercial fishing, when the herring was, when they were fishing for herring, that you could figure that in every little cove along the North Shore, there was a commercial fisherman, had his shanty and dock, and his dried his nets and processed his fish. And so yeah, and there are very few, if you know where the Split Rock cabins are, right next to Split Rock River, the Svays still are commercial fishing actively out of there. And there's I think one more up in Beaver Bay that's actively fishing now too, but it's nothing like it was in the early days.
I know at the restaurants serve whitefish from the lake, I think, and some of the restaurants up there.
Yeah.
The fish boils, which you don't get down here in Minneapolis.
Yeah.
Pretty
Fish
cool,
boils
yeah.
are fun.
Yeah, yeah.
It sounds like a disease, but it actually it's what you do in a pot when you throw fish in and it boils over, and yeah.
Thank
So
you,
I-
Lee.
oh.
Go ahead.
I had one more question. How do you follow up a life like that? I mean, can I ask what you're doing now? And do you travel or? Yeah, I'm curious.
Well, I retired in May of 2019, and then COVID showed up, and a few months later or 8 months later, and we had big plans, but like everybody else, we're kind of on shutdown, and I was working on this book, and which really was, I'm glad I saved so many of my records and could focus on that. But yeah, we're living in central Minnesota now, and liking that a lot, where my wife's from, and yeah, we're hoping to get out and do more traveling, and yeah, probably put some lighthouses on my agenda. I was fortunate enough that during my work at Split Rock, I was able to attend a lot of conferences and go to a lot of other lighthouses around the country. And there's a lot of neat places to see, and still got to get out there and see a lot of them.
Any last questions?
You have any other favorite lighthouses around, or that you recommend visiting, or in the area?
Oh yeah, boy, I really like some of the East Coast lighthouses. There's some really nice ones down. St. Augustine Lighthouse is a very tall one. They tend to be tall on the East Coast because they're down on tidal flats or pretty low areas. And they want to be seen from a long ways out. Ponce Inlet Lighthouse by Daytona Beach is another neat one. Around the Great Lakes, that if you haven't been to the Shipwreck Museum and Whitefish Point, that's a pretty neat place to go on the other end of the lake, on the eastern end.
Oh, right, yeah.
There's some nice ones in Maine too, right?
Oh yeah.
Is that by Bar Harbor or somewhere, I think, if I recall right?
Yeah, there were, you got to figure there were about 1,200 lighthouses around the country, about 400 on the East Coast, 400 on the West Coast, and 400 on the Great Lakes. So there's a lot of them out there. And it's funny that at Split Rock, a lot of people made their vacations around going to lighthouses. We had one couple that came and they said, this is our 500th lighthouse we've come and seen. So yeah, it's kind of a thing. It's like railroad museum people, or tractor museums, or it's whatever. Everybody has things they like to do. But lighthouses are neat because the architecture, they are all designed specifically for their location, and no two of them, well, very few of them look alike. And they're built, the wood ones in Maine and in the Northeast, and brick ones in the Southeast, and then out on the West Coast, they're totally different. So it's really neat to see how they're designed to fit the location.
And you can stay overnight in one and two harbors there if you want. I don't know what that costs.
That's right.
Yeah.
And if you want to volunteer, you can volunteer through the National Park Service out in the Apostle Islands and spend 6 weeks out there as living at a lighthouse and showing people through.
I talked to somebody who did that out on Oak Island, I think. Yeah. That wasn't the lighthouse. So I think there's a lighthouse on Oak Island.
Yeah, that's yeah, if you've got the time, and I don't know if I would assume this summer they're opening that up again, up that program, if they didn't have it last summer. But yeah, it's it's a way to see them from the inside.
What was the frequency of the, each one has a different frequency. Do you remember what the frequency was on that one? Split Rock?
Yeah, well, for Split Rock, it was one white flash every 10 seconds, which was different than, say, Devil's Island right across the lake, which was one flash every 10 seconds, but it was a red flash. Two Harbors had a double flash, which is the next one 20 miles away down the shores. Yeah, so every lighthouse has a different characteristic, and that's listed on the light list that the ship's captains keep on board the ship. So if they come out of a bank of fog or something, they see a characteristic of a lighthouse, you can tell, look at their list and see which one it is and know for sure where they're located. Yeah, that was important. And all this was before the days of radar and later GPS. So they were traveling by compass, and those guys had to know what they were doing.
Thank you, Lee. It was such a pleasure having you join us. Fascinating. And the pictures were gorgeous.
That's really fun.
Well, thank you. I enjoyed being here and seeing you guys, and it's a great organization.
I think that book's going to make a good gift for my wife. I'm thinking I'm going to buy it.
No, that's a great idea. Coffee table book. It's kind of like I designed it, kind of like National Geographic, that you can read it in depth if you want, or you can look at the photos and read the captions. And there's little sidebars with historic information about the keepers and that kind of thing. So a little bit of everything.